Welcome back to Web3Workers Pod. We are your new co-host, Feems.
And I'm Ariel.
Hazel, our other co-host, isn't able to join us this week, but you'll catch her on the next one. Our lovely co-hosts, Dan and Mia, are off to pursue other opportunities, and we thank them for their time on the pod. So let's begin with a couple of intros about us. Ariel?
Hello, everyone. I'm Ariel. I'm an economist, and I've always been concerned about how workers are affected by our gig economy. I'm from Brazil. I'm currently living in the Northeast in the sunny Salvador, and I'm the co-founder of Blockchain na Escola, which is an educational project here in Brazil. Feems?
Awesome. And I am Feems, a self-described governerd, that is DAO governance nerd. My background is in political science, a heavy DAO contributor, and just really excited about how we can leverage not only blockchain technology, but the way that we work in DAOs to translate into the way that we work in real life. So to begin on the topic of DAOs, Ariel, what had interested you about DAOs? Like, what was your experience and how did you start?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my actual involvement with DAOs started around July last year. I used to work in a 9 to 5 in a Web2 company called Quinto Andar here in Brazil, one of the biggest startups in the country. And then it didn't work out at some point, and I had been, studying blockchain and a lot of the concepts around it, and I just decided to take this leap and said, I'm gonna work in Web3. I'm just gonna find a way, and that's how I started getting involved with DAOs in the first place. Like I was just researching the internet, and there's just so much stuff about Web3. And then the first that caught my attention was the Tokenomics DAO. They are a DAO that's specializing in the subject of tokenomics. And as an economist, it drew my attention at the time. So that's how I first got involved. And then after that, I met the Blockchain na Escola and became a co-founder. So I think, despite the coincidences along the way, what drew me to DAOs was this concept of, contributor autonomy. I think when I left my previous jobs, I felt very frustrated about hierarchy. I had been through a layoff and felt that leadership was not always making the best decisions, and I didn't feel empowered to put my voice out there and kind of change the direction that things were going. And I felt that DAOs could be a solution to this problem because of the autonomy. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that matter, things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the autonomy was interesting, but for me, it was also interesting in terms of the ability to propose and get funds for things that mattered most to your community. And so from my experience, I had, left the 9 to 5 and had been working as a freelancer and a social entrepreneur, and was just really frustrated with the lack of prioritization, specifically when it came to funding things that mattered to communities directly rather than these big grand scheme ideas. And so I was in a design and branding accelerator program and heard about DAOs, and was really interested in it because, I was always interested in internet communities. But I was interested in the fact that it felt like we were using tech for something bigger and better. Also, the fact that we can collaborate not only in the areas of work, but areas of funding and of things that are like mattered most to the community. So that's what I was kind of really attracted to, the idea of DAOs, and of course the use of the blockchain to kind of erode things like corruption and allow things like transparency to happen. And so I kind of went full force. Like I I think in total had participated in about 10 different DAOs just to see, what communities I best fit into, which ones I could add value to and contribute, and also have the opportunity to make new friends because, we were, well, at the time I was like, it was still in the middle of the pandemic, and I was living in a smaller town. So it was really great just to like meet like-minded people. And then I kind of went like full into the rabbit hole of DAOs. And with my background in political science and design, I was most interested also about how we can utilize this idea of collective decision making, which we call governance, to provide people resources that they can apply in their real life.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way and story to getting into DAOs, and just reminded me that one of my first experiences was an accelerator program from Bankless DAO about governance. And I think it was really good to, go through that experience at the start of my journey, because I feel that DAO governance is such a huge topic, and it's, at least for me, it's kind of hard to wrap my head around that. So, I don't know if you as a political scientist, feel differently, but I think, despite just, having all these concepts of using technology or having autonomy and trying to, structure a community, there's a mindset shift that you need to make to work in DAOs. And I feel at least that governance is one of those big aspects that you need to learn how to work with it. And it can be challenging. At least for me, I think it was challenging, especially in the start of my journey in DAOs. How do you feel about that?
I mean, like I would totally agree with you. It's less about governance, right? Like I think that we have governance kind of wrong. It's not about making decisions on big things or getting everybody's say. The approach that we have had on governance, I think, is a little bit dated, kind of like on our real world. I would totally agree with you that everything is really a mind shift, right? Like even when you started to work in DAOs, like I had, volunteered for organizations before that were like-minded, and, they had a treasury. So like that isn't new, but this idea that we're all sovereign workers in this organization that is decentralized, where nobody's going to tell you what to do and nobody sets up priorities, was, I think, a mind shift in itself. And I think that the reason why I was kind of able to move with intention is because I had been working as a freelancer for a year, but I didn't just like learn how to be a freelancer, right away. Like there were YouTube videos to tell me how to do that, and accelerator programs and education, and, like models that you could use. And I think with DAOs, there hadn't been. And so I think that, there's a lot of high expectations for contributors, and also high expectations for DAOs as a concept. But we hadn't really kind of recognized that there are not only like human elements in which like we have to do mind shifts, but organizational elements that we're kind of missing in DAOs, specifically like the why, the how are we going to get there, what are sort of attainable goals that we can collectively gain, like how do we align our communities, like those big things in organizations, I think was missing. And I think that that's where we're at right now when we're really thinking about it. So yeah, I would completely agree with you. Like, where do you think were the biggest kind of mind shifts that you had to think about when you were a contributor, looking back?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first, I just want to say that, I feel that DAOs can be used as buzzwords as well. So sometimes we're calling things DAOs, but they resemble more like a centralized company. It's just, less people, and maybe they don't have a tax ID. it works very similar to a company. And I think really structuring decisions in a way that people feel empowered to bring their thoughts and to kind of conduct their own experiments. I think that's the biggest challenge that I've experienced and that I see now as a co-founder, because I feel that it's much more maybe comfortable for you to look up to someone as if he or she was your boss, and that's how at least I learned how to work. I would always have a manager who would more or less set the priorities, and I had kind of this narrow range of influence, or at least that was how I approached my work experiences before. Whereas when you join a DAO, there's usually just such a big playground that you can just try anything, that it can be hard to focus. And I think especially if the DAO is not well structured, it can be a chaotic environment that is not necessarily productive. So I'll just use blockchain Escola as an example, because we just in our first semester and we don't call ourselves a DAO because of this buzzword concern, but we're trying to decentralize our organization. But like in the first semester, we had some milestones that we had to achieve for our grant, and it provided kind of a clear path forward. And so we just had to go there and achieve these milestones, but it kind of it could reduce our creativity. I feel that we weren't necessarily thinking creatively in how we would achieve those goals because they were set, and so we were just in execution mode. And now in the second semester, we're trying to take a different approach. So we took the month of July to regroup and kind of think about how organization is structured and how we could start paving the way for decentralization. And then we started realizing that we needed an actual structure. Like, I think the organization was still relying a lot on a few key people doing their jobs, and other people would wait to receive their tasks. So that's where we're trying to make a shift, where we design circles, which are like, you could say, organizations within the project, and each circle should set its priorities and its goals and eventually its own budget. But that takes time. We made this new design, but now we are in the path of making it a reality, of making people actually be able to take it and use it in the best way. So I would say that to me, the hardest challenge is to really break this 9-to-5 mentality and make people not look up to you as a manager. I think leadership is important, even in DAOs. But I don't like this kind of agent principle dilemma that you can also see in the organization. So that's like, I feel when I first joined a DAO, I kind of had this mindset, and now I'm trying to make other people make the same mindset shift. I don't know if that made sense.
I mean, yes, it does. Like, I think that, people who are like go-getters and can just take up on tasks are pretty valuable as contributors in DAOs. However, I do think that it is important for DAOs, like any organizations, to really clarify like their why, right? So it's like, why are you a DAO? What objectives are you trying to achieve? what type of members, do you anticipate being in your DAO, and what ways are their activities going to be valuable to that? Because, I love working in DAOs, and I want them to be the future or models of employment. Not necessarily might everything be a DAO, but I think in order for us to get there, there has to be clear direction. And then also from a contributor's perspective, though, too, is that you can't, yes, of course, go into an organization or DAO that is, and then just kind of expect all of the gains without any sort of effort in creating or bringing in value through your contribution. And I think that sometimes people stay in DAOs a little bit too long and then kind of become like resentful from that experience. But I think like anything, and that's what I learned in terms of like a freelancer, is that like you also have to value your time, right? And so if you're entering a DAO, you kind of have to have an idea of what you want to do and how you want to contribute. And before you formally really enter, and I think it's because Discords are open in most of these open DAOs, you can kind of explore how things are being done and like ask questions. And that's, I think, where the agency comes on you, because unfortunately, like, there is no like real clear onboarding process for you to find your fit in a DAO perfectly. That you kind of have to figure out yourself. Although there are others, right? Like I think that ones that kind of can model types of employment or working are really service DAOs, right? And so whether that's like a vector DAO or a raid guild, where you have a specific skill set that is valuable to the market, and then within that DAO, they have clients in which you provide the service to, and then a percentage of that project will go back to the treasury, and then proposals be met and things like that. And so I think that when it comes to like service DAOs, I think that they've pretty much expanded really, really well, and because they've had a clear direction and also showcase like what their product market fit is and how they could feed their treasury, which I think that now in the bear market is what DAOs are really thinking about. But then also contributors are leaving DAOs because they also have to pay bills as well. And so I think that reality of sustainability is really something that's top of mind for both the DAOs and contributors.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it resonated with my experience. Like in the tokenomics DAO was also a service DAO, so I think in some ways there were things that were clearer. Like it has a consulting arm about tokenomics, so what we needed to do was to get clients. Maybe I don't know if we were going about it the best way, but I think the path was kind of clear to DAO sustainability. But I agree, it comes down to how much people are actually getting compensated. And is that enough for them to make a living? And I think a lot of times it is not. And then you see a lot of contributors that are part-time or that have like 1 hour a week that they can dedicate to the DAO. And I think that also adds some complexities to managing the DAO's work, not in a manager-employee sense, but like I think someone's gotta be the kind of project manager, and I'm usually in that role. That's why I'm also sensitive to this kind of matters, because it's much harder to manage a project when you also have to think about how much time each of your contributors will be able to dedicate, or like, does that person have a problem at their main job and won't be able to work for a whole week? So these are the kind of things that I would not have to deal with as a product manager at my previous works, and that I need to take into account. So I think there are also challenges in how you actually plan the number of people you have, and And then as you mentioned, like there has been some kind of exodus because of the bear market, and I think there's overall kind of a feeling that things are more volatile, and we don't know what's going to happen in like 1 or 3 months from now. And also, I think a lot of DAOs that are not being able to get funded enough to keep on working. So based on your experience, I think you started working in DAOs in the bull time, and you mentioned you worked in a lot of DAOs. So do you think the experience has changed a lot from then, and the sentiment among contributors? How do you feel about that?
Yeah. I mean, like, I think that also the difference is that I never got into DAOs to like make money. I really, and because like the DAOs that I had didn't really, like I didn't really have money like maybe other protocol DAOs in which one can sustain themselves for months at a time. Like I mean, obviously we did some services that were great, and I was able to do that, but I think that the biggest kind of shift is because I worked as a freelancer and I did so many, like, I watched so many YouTube videos as like what it meant to be like a freelancer. I was always going into DAOs about like, oh, why am I interested in this DAO? What sort of value can I bring? And like, what sort of value can I receive in them? And in the beginning, obviously it was, even in the bull, it was still very like messy and ambiguous. But I always just ask myself, like, am I learning or am I earning in this? And if I'm not doing either, then it's okay to shift. And I think that that's the thing, is that I had worked internally on myself to be able to communicate like my needs, or the fact that maybe I wouldn't be able to do this project, or that I just couldn't contribute any longer in this particular DAO. And I think that that's one of the mind shifts that many people don't have the opportunity to, right? Like they don't necessarily want to disappoint people, so then they just like disappear instead, right? There's like a lack of like communication, and also just like, I think because we are so decentralized and all over the world, and at that time everybody was anonymous, like we didn't have that like personal connection where we would need to communicate with somebody to say like, hey, we're just not happy or whatever. Like I feel like the narrative of the decentralization, I mean, should have been applicable just to the to the blockchain, but when it came to like DAOs that had thousands and thousands of members, it's really hard to make those personal connections. So then you don't feel like a sense of responsibility, like maybe when you don't do things that you're supposed to do in the DAO, or you just leave as well. And I think that now people are just kind of rethinking about, what value the DAO brings to them. And because it's the bear market, we have kind of shifted this narrative that like DAOs are the future of work and you can quit your job, but more like, we still believe in the future that we said that we want, and we're just going to have to work hard in doing it. But then I think that also contributors are thinking about how much time they want to contribute to a DAO. So like I myself am kind of in the like learning phase. And so with the DAO that I'm currently in, like I wanted to practice my like writing and design skills. And so that's how I contribute to it, which still has value as well. And so I think that, value and contribution can vary dependent on the individual, and also just like very dependent on the DAO. And I think it's really up to the contributor to kind of analyze how they want to spend their time and where.
Yeah, I really like the concept of DAOs as a stepping stone for you to practice those skills that you want to develop. I think DAOs are a great place to experiment on a new skill that you're trying to get, or just to work on skills that you've been developing, and then you can have the experience of doing that in Web3, which is instrumental if you want to really work in this market or sector. Like you need to have some proof of work, if you know what I mean. And I think DAOs are a great way of getting that. But you touched on another subject that I think it's interesting, is that...
Sorry, I have a question, actually.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually wanted to ask you what skill sets, because I think when I talk to many people who want to get into DAOs or kind of lost in their DAOs, like I ask them, like, you know, what do you do in real life? And they're like, well, I was a project manager for 10 years, or I did accounting. And I'm like, oh, well, you could do that in a DAO. And they're like, really? And so I think that a lot of people think that they can't leverage the current skill sets that they have into a DAO because it's like all new. And so, like, what kind of skills did you apply to when you were a contributor in a DAO or when you were creating your DAO?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think for me, I didn't go that far from what I used to do. So I worked as a product manager. While I was doing that, I learned some analytics, some SQL, some Python. And I'm also an economist. So I think I was able to kind of use at least parts of that skill set to contribute to the tokenomics DAO, for example. So I wrote some protocol analysis and analyzed their tokens. So the part I didn't know was the tokenomics, but I could kind of borrow from the economics and the product management side to understand that part. So I think I could learn while also using my other skills. And I was also able to fit in some data analysis parts into those analysis, because, you know, since blockchain data is open, I can just go into doing analytics and find some statistics for the BET token, for example, which is the Brave browser's basic attention token, and was the first token that I analyzed. That's why I'm mentioning it. So I think I really see myself as leveraging my previous skill set at the tokenomics DAO. And then once I joined Blockchain Escola as a co-founder, I think the product side of me was really prominent, because I was really creating a new product, even though it is an educational product, which is totally out of my previous work experience. I still see it as a product, and I have to think about, you know, product market fit and scalability, how customers perceive and interact with the product. So I can kind of use that framework, but you know, as a co-founder of a small project, and I'm currently the only one that is full-time in the project. So we have some challenges on, you know, really splitting all the tasks that we have. So during this year, I've done a lot of things that I was really not used to doing, and that can be challenging, and it can create some anxiety at times. So like, I spend a lot of time trying to figure out our communication, like social media stuff. And that's something that I feel I'm really bad at. So the learning curve has been steep for me, but it's something really important. Like Web3 is all about community. So we need to get our voice out there and kind of publicize the work that we're doing. I also have to kind of work as HR, because, you know, there are no managers. So I'm responsible for listening to other contributors' concerns, and whenever we want to bring someone new, I'll be the person conducting the process. Also have been getting more experience in how to fund a project. That's not something I used to do before. I think this comes closer to my previous skill set, but it adds a lot of complexity layers. But I actually am starting to really enjoy the funding part and trying to think about the financial sustainability of the organization. So I think, yeah, just to mention a few, there was a handful that was kind of aligned to what I used to do, but I also had to pick up some new skills along the way. But in designing blockchain Escola, we're trying to fit people where they have some experience. So like our financial analyst actually works as a finance analyst in her 9 to 5. We also have an educator who's just finishing his doctorate in education. We have a designer that is a designer, and a lawyer that also has like his main job as a lawyer for humanitarian causes. So I think we're doing a good job of uh, making use of the skills that people have developed in the organization, while also providing opportunities for them to learn. So we're not always giving the task to the person that is the most skilled to do that. If you show interest in something, then we'll provide you the opportunity to learn. Was your experience similar? Like you mentioned some things about design and governance. Were those things that you were doing before DAOs?
Yeah, I mean, I never did governance specifically in my DAO. Like I wanted to. I think I came in doing that, but then that wasn't really what was most needed, and I felt like I had to have a little bit more skin in the game before I made comments on how we should structure our organization. And so I had a background in research because I was a grad student, and so I did a lot of research in DAOs and communications. I worked in like project management, so I applied kind of those particular like skill sets, and just was really like what needs to be done and like how can I help and how can I kind of leverage the knowledge that I have, but then also DAOs have provided me an opportunity to learn new things, right? Like learn about like DeFi, and I get to work on design, which I've only been able to do like a little bit, and now I can actually just do it for fun. And so I think that that's the thing too, is that it provides you an opportunity to learn new skill sets that maybe in your regular employment, they would tell you to stay in your lane. And what I like about DAOs, as disorganized as they might be, is that nobody ever tells you to stay in your lane. Like you have the opportunity, if you have like an idea that's like valuable, that you're like, oh, I want to do this, or I want to work on that with you, then people are pretty open to that. And I really love the collaborative nature. So we are almost at the end of our conversation. I actually just wanted to talk about where we are now in terms of DAOs, and if you've noticed any kind of interesting shifts. For me, I've been thinking, I think that DAOs in general have been thinking about like how to feed their treasury, like how to maintain sustainability. And of course, there have been some that are closing, such as like DAO Masters and Meta Gamma Delta. And so I think that right now we are really thinking about like sustainability. Some moves from specific DAOs that I thought were really interesting were things like optimism and the retroactive goods funding. I know that ENS also did some retroactive funding, and of course DAO Drops focuses on that, and Gitcoin's Citizen Round. So I think that like this idea of doing the work as well could play into those that are kind of just want to experience working in DAOs less than like the actual being a worker in DAO, and then like having the community really decide the value on that. Now I think that it should really be up to the contributor how much time they want to kind of do for these types of retroactive funding opportunities, because in essence you could also receive nothing. But I think that like DAOs experimenting with things like this is interesting. And I think that really it's made possible by the bear market, where, people aren't afraid to experiment and make mistakes and learn, because there's just not as much, the stakes aren't as high as they are in the bull.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that DAOs kind of track the overall market sentiment that, money is harder to get now than it was like a year ago. And so I think everyone needs to be more conscious about how they're expending money, like what kind of value they're compensating. So I think there's this aspect, and the positive side of it is that it makes DAOs need to think more strategically about how they use their resources. So I think the bear market is a good time for DAOs to get more mature and kind of set their priorities more clear. But yeah, they can't lose the other aspect of experimentation. I think the DAO model is a really big governance experiment, and on top of that, you can have a lot of product and service experiments, and so that's part of the beauty of it. So yeah, I think when things are quieter, there's really more room to try new things. And here in Latin America, I see a lot of DAOs focusing on diversity and inclusion and education, which I think is really positive. So I think traditionally there's kind of a lag in technology adoption between the global north and the global south. And I see that as a big concern for Latin American DAOs. So, there are a lot of DAOs concerned about bringing more women to Web3, for example, like her DAO, and there are some other names that I'm forgetting now, but I know there are a lot, and I'm saying this based on the last Gitcoin round, the beta round. And there are also a lot of education DAOs that are focused like in schools, like Blockchain Escola. There's also Web3 Beach that is in, I think, Honduras in Central America. So I really see this big concern with inclusion and with onboarding the next generation to Web3. And I feel, to me, the way that I see this market is a really positive focus, because maybe the people that will benefit the most from Web3 are these young people that are being onboarded now, and these people that traditionally didn't have a voice or had less influence overall, and now are starting to get the tools to for economic empowerment and to create a lot of value. I think Web3 can create a lot of value, and I think it's really positive that it's getting to the right hands, in my opinion. And just to wrap up, I think I see, at least where I'm living here in Salvador, which is in the Bahia state in the Northeast, I've had some conversations with like government agencies, and I see blockchain as a kind of a recurrent theme. Most people don't really know what blockchain does, but they are looking to innovation as a potential resource to kind of fight the social and environmental issues that we are facing. And I think that's the biggest opportunities that I see for DAOs and for other Web3 organizations. I think there's a lot of room for these organizations to fit in and provide their products or services where traditional companies are not really able to get, at least not in the current structure. So I think, taking this time to kind of think through financial sustainability and find the right priorities can prove really positive to the overall DAO landscape.
Cool. I mean, it's really great that you kind of showcased, what other regions are thinking about DAOs, because I definitely do see this now more as a global movement rather than just kind of centralized in the US or Western Europe. And so I'm really looking forward to how other regions around the world are thinking about DAOs, because their concept also on contribution and their concept of, work and things like that differ. And so I think that having this agility of DAOs really being about the benefit of the communities that they serve is what I'm actually really looking forward to. So yes, we are at the end of our conversation. This has just basically been a water cooler chat between me and Ariel, so that listeners can know a little bit more about us. But yeah, definitely check out our upcoming episodes. We'll be interviewing key players within the Web3 ecosystem to provide much more understanding of working in this environment. Bye.
Bye. Thanks everyone for listening.